Normally, I script my videos, but for this one, I thought I would make an exception. I played through Silent Hill 2 Remake on standard difficulty. The playlist for my first time playthrough can be found on my channel. After that, I went back and replayed the original Silent Hill 2, and then after that, I replayed the remake, but on the hardest difficulty on New Game Plus. So suffice it to say, should be in a pretty solid place to talk about my experience. The road to Silent Hill 2 Remake's release has been an interesting one. Ever since it was first announced that Bloober Team was going to be developing the game, it was met with a lot of pushback. I can't say that I was fully behind that, considering that of the 3 games that I've played from Bloober Team's catalogue, which were Blair Witch, Observer, and The Medium, I liked them all. I enjoyed The Medium considerably. So when it was announced that they were going to be remaking Silent Hill 2, to be honest, that is an unenviable task for any video game developer. Bloober Team did step up to the task, but I think any video game developer would have gotten blowback regardless, because the original Silent Hill 2, it still holds up. I first played the original Silent Hill 2 2 years ago, and the best way that I can sum up my experience and how I feel about that game is, without question, one of my favorite stories ever told in a video game. Is it one of my favorites to play? Not really. I'll elaborate more on why I feel that's the case, but with regards to the remake, I do remember in the lead up to the release date for the game, the 2 trailers that had come out. One where it showed James Sunderland visibly on the urge of crying, which admittedly, it was a bit too OTT for Silent Hill 2 as we understood it. They understood that as well. They heard the feedback, and they do fundamentally correct all of that in the final game, so good on them. And then of course there was the combat trailer, which wasn't the best. Like, the focus on the combat was a little bit kind of weird to begin with, considering that that's not really what Silent Hill 2 was about. It's definitely the thing that they have radically updated, arguably the most from the original. But yeah, regardless of what I feel with the games that I have played from Bloober Team's catalogue, not everybody feels similarly. Like, even someone from the team not too long ago came out and said that they were done making shitty games. Me personally, I wouldn't be too hard on yourselves. But that's simply not reflective of the reality. The reality was that this project had a lot of naysayers, and they had a lot to prove and a lot to overcome, admittedly. And now that it has nearly been a month since the Silent Hill 2 remake came out, what's happened since? A majority positive consensus, and the Silent Hill franchise now being back in the conversation. Like, regardless of whether you dislike the game, you can't deny the impact that this remake has had. But obviously you're here with this video to tune in to the impact it had on me. And the impact that it had on me was about a 9.5 out of 10 experience. This was fucking phenomenal. Like, the majority positive consensus on this game, it was earned, and there's a reason why. Bloober Team proved the naysayers wrong. They took an unenviable task and they turned it into an absolute labour of love. Silent Hill 2 Remake is one of the scariest games that I have played in the last few years. In terms of psychological horror or survival horror, even in the last decade, I would say, this is one of the strongest. Like, this was really so effective. In terms of like standalone terms, it already succeeds on that level, but as a remake, it not only stays true to the original, but the changes that they do make to update and modernize it, it's made this already enduring and lasting video game narrative more accessible for a new generation. And as a big fan of the original Silent Hill 2, I 100% approve this game. And as a big fan of the original Silent Hill 2, I'm overjoyed that we now have another newer version that we can play and enjoy. I suppose for anybody that's curious on whether or not I think this game replaces the original Silent Hill 2, I would say mostly. The reason why I stress mostly is because I have access to the original Silent Hill 2. I can go back and play that game whenever I want. So yes, I do prefer the remake over the original. Let's talk about the presentation. Like, the graphics, the sound design, the music, all of this is top notch. Silent Hill, the town of Silent Hill, looks great. The fog looks absolutely spectacular. The character models and the detail on them, The cutscenes have such a lovely flow to them, and the facial animations and motion capture work, very strong like. And thankfully the thing that they have kept from the original, which I kind of alluded to earlier, was the highly elevated state of emotion that we saw in that first trailer for the game a while back. Like, they keep it neutral. They still keep it off-putting. They still keep it distant, and they still keep it cold. Like for James's character, like this sort of state of neutrality and almost nothingness, it's very, very much preserved here. But obviously the biggest difference is the detail in his reactions to what's going on. And Luke Roberts, who plays James Sunderland, very impressed by him. He was excellent here. One character that's absolutely executed better in the remake is Angela. Angela is probably the saddest character in the game, but sometimes in the original, sometimes the way that she is portrayed, it kind of came off a little bit crazy for the sake of crazy. In the remake, Gianna Keehee, apologies if I've mispronounced the name, the way she is able to convey the sheer hurt, pain, and defeat in Angela's character as she's going through her own journey, unbelievably good.
No! I'm sorry! I've been bad! Please don't!
And Eddie is also done very, very well here. One detail that I really liked about him in the cutscenes, and everybody's pointed this out, but it's worth reiterating, his breath. He's like a walking freezer, and it's a very lovely bit of foreshadowing for his boss battle. Like, it's a small detail in those cutscenes, but it really goes a long way to telling that greater story of what Eddie is going through in his journey through Silent Hill. This is what I love about the concept of Silent Hill, is just this idea that these nightmare-inducing manifestations of one's psyche and one's guilt and one's general emotional baggage, this is something that Silent Hill 2 explores really thought-provokingly. Like, the original for its time did that very, very well, and again, as I said earlier, like, it still holds up, but it's these little details that the remake adds that just enhances it, and it fully realizes it. That's kind of how I would sum up the remake in a nutshell, is it takes everything that the original did well, keeps it, but it also takes the stuff that did not work as well and realize them to their full potential. Yes, Silent Hill 2 Remake is longer than the original game. It took me 15 hours to clear the remake, and when I played through the original it took me 7. Pretty sure it took me like 9 to 10 on my very, very first playthrough of that game 2 years back. But the question I would have on my mind as a fan is, are all the new additions conducive to the flow of the game? Do they make it better? Or have they just added stuff in for the sake of it, to just pad it out without much thought? Thankfully, it's absolutely the former. When you're walking around the town of Silent Hill, you have access to more areas, way more than you ever did in the original, which was barely the case. But not only that, with each section of the game that you go to, so the apartments, the hospital, Toluca prison, and the hotel, one fundamental thing that I love about the level design of this game, and it's very, very Resi 2 Remake-esque, is the sort of interconnectedness of each of the settings. You're on one path, you're battling enemies, you're opening doors, you're finding new puzzles, but sometimes you'll hit a dead end and you'll have to backtrack. But then you'll overcome that dead end. When you're past that dead end, it'll take you back around to where you were before. And so then when you get back to that point, it's like, oh wow, oh, this is nice and familiar. And in that sense, you get to know your environment and your surroundings like way more intimately. It just organically fleshes everything out a hell of a lot more. And it also makes exploring feel a lot more incentivized, and it gives me way more opportunities to loot. I love looting, and looting is key to a good survival horror game, and this game's got it. I love how the game looks. They preserve the characters, and they have meaningfully expanded on every location. But the biggest major draw for me coming into this remake is knowing that Akira Yamaoka was coming back to do the music and the sound design. The soundtrack to the original Silent Hill 2 is one of my all-time favorite soundtracks in any video game. It's just the acuity at which it is able to portray melancholia, tension, horror, and a sense of relaxation all at once through a variety of different tracks Just what an absolutely thrillingly unique amalgamation. And he's done it again in the same way that the developers meaningfully expanded on the locations and the exploration. Akira Yamaoka has meaningfully expanded yet again on the music. He still keeps a lot of the same tracks from the original, but he remixes them and reworks them and even expands on one or two in a way that is still, again, so holistically conducive to how the story progresses and how it impacts the characters. The biggest one for me that really stood out was the reworking of Magdalene. Like, it used to be just that ascending and descending progression on the piano, your ba-da-da-da-da-da. But what he has done is he has taken that progression and he's layered it. And what he has done with it is it actually made for something that actually impacted me more. There was an emotional quality to it that felt more fleshed out. And I was like, wow. The role that music and sound design plays in Silent Hill 2 in how it conveys James's unraveling. This is something that's not only, again, preserved in the remake, but it feels heavier. It feels more overbearing. There was something, particularly towards the second half of this game, the atmosphere actually digs into you. Like, I felt like it was just digging into my head and my torso. Actually, hold on. Best way to describe it, like when he runs down from the car and you find the first save file, he says it feels like someone is groping around in his skull. That's the best summary for it. That's what it felt like. When the music needs to ameliorate you, it does that. When it needs to make you feel somewhat awkward, it does. When it needs to scare you, it absolutely does. When it needs to dig into you, oh fuck. Wow, I came into this remake expecting nothing but pure genius from Akira Yamaoka, and he absolutely fucking delivered as per usual. Now let's talk about gameplay. Does James feel good to control? Does the overhauled combat system serve as a benefit to the overall experience or a detriment? Replaying the original Silent Hill 2 right after finishing the remake was, my eyes were officially fully opened to just how slow, janky, and repetitive the combat in the original game was. Now, it did the bare minimum serving its purpose, because ultimately, like, I don't play Silent Hill 2 for like the most thrillingly inventive, unique gameplay experience. It's the story that I'm there for. If the story is able to keep me engaged, I am going to experience all of it for all its imperfections and what have you, just to see it play out. Because that's the power of it. But sweet fuck almighty, the combat in the original game, it's not good. I was talking about it doing the bare minimum. That was before I played the remake, but now I've played the remake, and now I'm going back playing the original and experiencing this. I don't even think it just does the bare minimum. Now, admittedly, when you're out in the town of Silent Hill and all the enemies are about, you're way faster than any of them will be. You can just run by them, and that's exactly what I did. But I mean, when I tried playing it on the hard difficulty and I got to the apartments bit, oh Jesus, it was obnoxious. I enjoy fixed camera angles. I enjoy tank controls. I think they absolutely have their charm. I know I'm not the only one that feels that way. But with regards to the combat side of Silent Hill 2 Remake, what did I want to get out of this? It's very simple. I don't want James to feel like Leon from Resi 4 Remake. James Sunderland ain't a badass. He's not the most combatively competent. Literally, take his guns away and all his melee combat weapons away. He's nothing. But Bloober Team accomplished something quite interesting with the combat system here, simply because it is simple. It's just an attack and dodge mechanic that you are utilizing. But the encounters themselves, not once did I ever come away from them feeling like a badass. These felt scrappy. They feel messy. One of my favorite aspects about Luke Roberts' performance as James are the grunts that he lets out when you're stomping enemies in and when you're taking them on. It's a struggle. You can hear it. And there's nothing about that feels pleasant. This approach and this kind of style absolutely would not work in something like Resident Evil. But for something like Silent Hill, and especially Silent Hill 2, it absolutely works. The one thing that I will say about it, and this was something that I really noticed on my second playthrough of the game, there were definitely more than a few instances where the lock-on to enemies isn't always 100%. And sometimes it did make for moments of annoyance and frustration. But admittedly, at the same time, there is a difference between an odd bit of frustration and a game breaker. This wasn't necessarily a game breaker for me. Like, particularly on the hard difficulty with the nurses, I have never felt less like a badass than I did going up against them. Because holy shit, they're tough. Especially the more deformed looking nurses. Fuck! Those encounters specifically really bordered on feeling like a fight for survival. And another interesting detail as well that I noticed as well is the shooting. There were times where an enemy would be spot on right in the reticle of where it is that I'm supposed to be shooting. And sometimes the bullets would miss more often than not. And I don't think that was by accident. Now, an obvious argument can be made for that, but for me, it kind of serves as a nice little incentive to strategize melee combat just as much as shooting. And like, regardless of what difficulty you play on, you're never starved for ammunition with your guns. But just the overall feel of the combat, the enemy types in the game are not your typical enemies. Now, they are the same enemy types that you're going to be bumping into like over and over again, but we also need to remember that there's a symbolic relevance to them. And this is something that's heavily prominent in the original as well. So there is a heavy psychological component as well that just adds to how unsettling it is to play. But I would just say, on a basic level of just overhauling the combat system of the original, Bloober Team have created something that is simple and accessible, but also serves James and also serves the story in general and the emotional stimuli it's supposed to generate in you. And I mean, outside of the combat, James just feels really good to control. Actually, I will say the one little tweak that I would make with the combat is sometimes when it's taking place indoors in small spaces, the camera, not always your friend. Sometimes it can just be a bit disorienting. But like I said before, with another tweak I'd make, again, none of these, this game never has a game-breaking issue, but given how good it is, these areas that require a bit of tweaking, that's what makes them stand out a bit. I'm just making sure that I've covered my bases there. So now that I've elaborated on the combat, I want to talk about the boss battles, because the boss battles are another element of the original that I wasn't too impressed by when I replayed it, but is something that the remake absolutely fucking exceeded my expectations on. There are two in particular that I want to go through, but I will say a lot of them are quite similar. And actually on my second playthrough, I was actually able to beat some of them with just straight melee combat. But that's not what I play Silent Hill 2 for. I don't want to be stuck on like a boss battle for too long, because I want the story to keep going. I don't want to be stuck in this place for too long. There are other video games, obviously, that prioritize, you know, that sort of overcoming, you know, the big boss and the strategizing and all that. That's not what Silent Hill 2 is. Like, are the boss battles easy? Yeah, but that's kind of a surface level critique of what it is that they are going for here. The two boss battles in particular that absolutely blew my mind in this game, however, are Abstract Daddy and Eddie. I'll go through Eddie's first because I have a lot to say on the Abstract Daddy one. You remember what I said earlier about this nice little small detail you see of Eddie in the cutscenes, of his breath and how cold it looks? What it foreshadows was his boss fight. You are fighting Eddie in this like meat freezer room, and it is completely enveloped in just the coldest looking haze. It's a boss battle that goes out of its way to mess with your sight, and it's not just one level. There's a few. Like all of the carcasses that are hanging from the ceiling, there comes a point where they're just moving around the place. You have to deal with that, but you also have to try and pinpoint where Eddie is. Like, the sound design can make this quite exciting as well, because Eddie could be talking and you feel like you have his location pinpointed and you head there, but he's not there. When he's off somewhere else, readying a kill shot with either his gun or his little crowbar. It's the thematic artistic design of the boss battle that really blew my mind. Because with Silent Hill 2 in general, you're basically given a front row seat to the psyche of all of these characters and what they are going through. This boss battle with Eddie, this gave me so much insight into him. And on that alone, it was not only tense, but it was also just a visual feast. So that was Eddie's boss fight. Now, let's talk about the Abstract Daddy boss fight. So, bit of context. In the original, it was just set in one room. And basically, like all of the boss fights in that game, you're just going from one point of the room, getting a shot off, and then running to the other part of the room, getting a shot off, and vice versa. That's what you're doing throughout. But the idea of it being set in the one room, it still holds up narratively, because yes, you're in their home, but you are in the room where all of this heinous abuse, this absolutely fucking awful shit that Angela's going through, you're in the room like where it's all taking place. So in that sense, like, it still holds up there. But the remake takes it out of one room and into the entire home. And the entire home, as it's conveyed in this game, it feels like an absolute labyrinth. I will never forget the first time that I played through this remake and experiencing that boss battle for the first time, and how frightened it made me feel. One of the most uncomfortable feelings I have ever had in a video game, in the original and in the remake, is avoiding the atoll of this absolutely nightmare-inducing abomination. On my second playthrough, I was able to utilize melee combat really to take him down, but like the first playthrough, it was just a matter of keeping my fucking distance from this thing. But there's one mind-blowing detail about this boss battle. So basically how it goes is, first part, you deal with him for a bit, then he disappears, you then have like a little period of rest. But with these in-between moments of rest, there's one detail. There is an opening leading into a closet. There is silence when you enter this closet. And then when you go back out, all of the manic sound and music, it all of a sudden kicks back in. This is absolutely amazing video game storytelling. And the insight that you now have into Angela's headspace, into her backstory, and everything that has made her the woman that she is, that you see throughout the story, everything comes to a head in the most fully realized way possible. It is an absolute mindfuck. Everything that she dealt with throughout her life, it was a mindfuck. And this boss battle and running away from this thing, it makes you feel like that, but it terrifies you. The original boss battle does have its place. That idea of it being isolated in the one room still works, but I much prefer this. I much prefer this. It sticks with me more. It frightens me more. It moves me more. It scares me more. And ye bet your fucking asses that by the time that boss battle was done, you can see this in my playthrough, I laid into this bitch. It's one of my top 3, I'd say, favorite sections of the game. Moving on to some other aspects of the game that I felt could have done with a little bit of tweaking. I've already mentioned the camera, the frenetic camera during the combat when you're in tight spaces indoors. The other thing that I wanted to mention as well, this is kind of more of a first playthrough newcomer kind of concern. It was most prevalent during the hospital section and the hotel section. Sometimes there are a cluster of puzzles that just come together quite quickly, and it kind of sends your head spinning a bit, because you know you have to you have these big settings that you have to explore and you have to find the solutions to them. But sometimes it's just getting hit with one after the other can just feel a little bit, oh Christ, another one? If you're not big into puzzles, sometimes the volume of them and the way that they're spaced out might not be for everybody. One change in the hotel section of the game that I do like This was something that actually quite confused me with the original. The abstract daddy boss just randomly comes back as a regular enemy type in the original. And that was something that I never really fully understood on both of my playthroughs of the original game. Thankfully, in the remake, they have taken that out and they have swapped it. They've actually just swapped it out for the monkey bar clowns, I'm just going to call them. And elaborating more on the hotel section, there is one section that is very stealth based. So James drops off all of his gear in this little locker. You take the elevator, it goes down to a certain floor where you have to deal with a puzzle, but you have to go through a bunch of different rooms, but you also have to avoid these monkey bar clowns. It was a little bit jarring on my first playthrough. I was like, this does not... It didn't feel naturally integrated. It definitely felt like the most incongruent little section of the game. But thankfully, the upshot with this section is that it is very brief. The game in no way feels tailored towards sort of stealth, sneaky instincts. Like, I'm glad that it doesn't overstay its welcome, but it's definitely the one part of the game where I'm like, that doesn't fully fit. And the last major talking point that I want to get to, Mary's final monologues towards the end of the game. Obviously, the first one takes place after you take care of the two pyramid heads. And all in all, what I will say, the voice actress who plays Mary and Maria, she's very good. The thing with the original voiceover and the way that the voice actress in that game delivered it, we know that this damn disease that is in Mary, it is eating her alive from the inside out. And in the original, listening to those monologues, so not pleasant. It is meant to hurt. You're not meant to feel at ease with what you're listening to. This person is dying, and they cannot accept. She can't accept that this is happening to her. She is fighting for survival. She is trying to rage against death. She's trying to rage against the disease. And all of that ache, all of that pain, all of that frustration, and that longing to be with James again, to try and rid him of this burden that he carries, but that she was not responsible for. This disease was responsible for that. All of that frustration, all of that sadness, and all of those raw feelings. This is something that the original game just completely blankets you with all of this pain.
James, wait. Please don't go. Stay with me. Don't leave me alone. I didn't mean what I said. Please, James. Tell me I'll be okay. Tell me I'm not going to die. Help me.
The original Silent Hill 2 has taken some flack for some of its voice acting, which at times...
What is it?
A letter from Mary.
Huh?
I want to go get it. Is that okay?
Yes, yes.
It is absolutely warranted. But Mary's last two monologues, it's some of the best voice acting I have ever heard in a video game, period.
I'm so sorry for what I did to you. Did to us. You've given me so much, and I haven't been able to return a single thing. That's why I want you to live for yourself now. Do what's best for you, James.
Like, the remake doesn't change the monologues, it doesn't change the way that it's written, but the one thing that's definitely changed is the direction that the voice actress was given.
Why are you still here? I told you to go. Are you deaf? Don't come back.
What made the originals work as well as it did was the fact that all of those feelings were not held back. In the remake, I can't help but feel like they were held back a bit. It's still good. The voice actress for Mary Maria in this game, like, still does a very good job. They did a very good job with Maria in general in this game. In SkillUp's review for the game, he brought up that there was this sort of section of the fan base that was not happy with how Maria looked in this game due to it being a matter of what, prudish censorship or something. I completely disagree with the prudish censorship claim. That's silly. Her black leather dress, her neckwear, her overall appearance is still quite sexually suggestive anyway. She still fulfills that surrealistic purpose in James's story of being the fantasized version of Mary that he's always wanted to see, that he's always wanted to be with. She does do a good job with these monologues, but there is just, for me, there's something missing. And for me, that absent ingredient is elevation. I don't really understand why they kind of leaned away from that. Like, I completely understand and support the game, like, believably grounding its characters a bit more, but there's also nothing wrong with allowing for the odd explosive moment. But the fact that I feel the absence of it in Mary's final monologues, that it doesn't hurt as much to listen to her. Like, it still hurts, it does, but I don't feel like it really went far enough. As a standalone piece of survival horror, Silent Hill 2 Remake is an absolute knockout. As a remake, doing its job of taking the original and updating it and modernizing it for a new generation while still preserving the integrity of the original game's story, again, knockout. I just want to say as well to anybody who's of the gatekeeping purist mindset of the original Silent Hill 2, that nothing is ever going to like replace what that game was, you know, with its fixed camera angles, with its tank controls, and the way that that kind of broke ground for the genre. Don't go dunking on other people's positive reactions to the game and accusing them of shilling just because what that original game was is not for them. Because here's the thing, it's not for everybody. It's your fuck, I love the game, but I have my grievances of it. The combat does not hold up. I'm sorry, it doesn't. I think at the bare minimum, Silent Hill fans ought to be breathing a sigh of relief right now for the impact that Silent Hill 2 Remake has had on this franchise, and the fact that it is now back in the conversation, that it's back in our minds, the fact that we can look forward to new outputs from this franchise. Hell, get a remake of the first Silent Hill going and then move on to the third one. Those two are directly connected to one another, so that would make sense. But then again, we also have Silent Hill Townfall and Silent Hill F to look forward to. They're going to be fucking interesting. You can't deny the net positive effect that this game is currently having. If Bloober Team want to make another Silent Hill game, have at it. I'll be picking it up. I love Silent Hill 2 Remake. I'm going to be playing this game a bunch more. Yeah, it's phenomenal. Loved it. Agus Shin Shin. That's all from me.